Hey everyone, it's Derek Crow with Rise Like Lions, and today we're talking about Trump's child separation policy and his administration's continued lies about it and what we're going to do about it today on Rise Like Lions. So folks, if you haven't noticed the news lately, Trump is separating children from their parents at the border. And that is an atrocity, in my opinion. I think it's the first atrocity of the Trump administration. And like I said yesterday, if you saw my live stream on Facebook, I think this is a test to see what we will tolerate as a society, and if we don't do something about it, the next test will be much worse. But I want to back up and just tell the story of what happened over the last few days for me and my family with regards to this policy and how we ended up in Tornillo protesting against it. A couple of days ago, my family and I were wrapping up a family vacation to Corpus Christi with my in-laws. We were having a great time. Henry got to see the beach, and it was great. We dug for fossils in the sand for about 3 days, and he got to see the Texas State Aquarium and the battleship Lexington and a bunch of other things, and it was a really great time. But hanging like a cloud over all of that was the news that kept breaking about Trump's family separation policy. It's really hard when you're aware of what's going on for some children to really fully engage and to feel okay about having a good time with your own family. I mean, if you're keyed into the news and you care about the state of our society, one of the really gross things about the Trump administration is that it robs the joy of life, because you know that these horrible things are happening in the background. And when you should be able to just sit and focus on your family, these things are going on in the background of your mind. The other thing that was really problematic from my perspective was, I'm an ex-candidate in a congressional race, and I was becoming really dissatisfied with what I saw as the Democratic response to this. It seemed like the Democrats were either in shock or they were stuck in conventional thinking and thinking that it was enough just to, offer legislation that maybe the Republicans could shoot down on child separation. And so I really started agitating on Twitter and Facebook and any place that I had a platform that wouldn't totally take me away from my family for a while, and started pushing people to start becoming more aggressive, because this is a really unconventional, hateful, evil policy that we're seeing, and conventional responses just aren't going to cut it. And I was very pleased to see at the end of our vacation in Corpus over this past week that Beto O'Rourke scheduled a march on Tornillo, Texas. And for those that don't know, Tornillo, Texas is just south of El Paso. It is out in, kind of the desert areas of Texas. It's really hot there in the summertime. It easily reaches triple digits on a regular basis in the summertime. It's a horrible place to house children outside. And that idea that we were going to put those kids there in a tent city, like Joe Arpaio style, really was disgusting. But this idea that Beto O'Rourke was going to lead a march out there really was a strong signal to me that people were kind of getting their heads right on what it was going to take to stop this. And that, was pushed along, I think, by the actions of Senator Jeff Merkley, who tried to go see kids at a border detainment facility and was rebuffed, and kind of kickstarted this idea of direct action by political leaders on the progressive side to try to at least see these kids and at best try to shut this policy down. But, we're in Corpus Christi. Who knows what kind of help we can be from there. At the end of the vacation, we wrapped it up on Saturday morning and started driving back to Austin. And I could see on social media that some of my friends were thinking about joining Beto O'Rourke. I felt like it was probably too late for me to find a ride. But when we got back, I talked to my wife about it, and I said, I feel these competing things. I feel like I'm too exhausted to drive, having driven from Corpus to Austin, to then drive out to essentially El Paso from Austin on the same day. I felt like I'd probably end up falling asleep and dying in the car. And because, if you've never driven out there, I-10 is a really long straight road that goes on for hours and hours and hours. And trying to do that when you don't have a lot of energy can be really tough. But I also said, I feel like we can't sit this one out. And, I talked to a couple of friends of mine, and the other thing about this day was Sunday was Father's Day. And, I was really looking forward to hanging out with my family and my kid to just kind of have a Father's Day that wasn't stepped on by a campaign or something. But it turned out that a couple of friends of mine, Mike Lewis, Chow No, and a couple other folks were starting to kind of agitate for getting people out there. Breton, a friend of ours who had been in Young Democrats and University Democrats, and we were thinking about whether or not we could get out there, and it turned out that they had a seat. So I just hit them up at the very last minute. It takes about 8 hours to get out there, and I think at about midnight I discovered they had an open seat in Breton's car, and I decided to go. I talked to my wife, and she urged me to go on behalf of our family. And so after having been in Corpus that morning, hopped in the car at about 12:45 at night, and we left Austin for an overnight drive, driving in shifts. And, my son is really used to having me there in the mornings. Even during the height of the campaign, I would usually be there when he woke up in the morning. He's an early riser, and I would make him breakfast and get him ready for Montessori school and send him on his way, even at the height of the campaign season. And so if I'm not there in the morning, it's a real shock to him. But, he woke up that morning, and I hadn't been able to say bye to him because I left at midnight, essentially. And he looked around the house, and, 3-year-olds can be really melodramatic. But what he said really got to me. My wife called me, and she said, Henry walked into the living room and said, Mommy, I can't handle this. And he laid down and said, I want my daddy. And that's very sweet, but it also hit me right in the gut because he's a white kid born to white parents who are, have all the privilege in the world. He's in his home. He is still with one of his parents. And even just that disruption to his routine was more than he felt like he could handle. And that really hit me right in the gut because I knew that the place that we were going was going to be filled with kids who didn't just have that disruption of their day that they couldn't handle, but they didn't have their family with them. We had seen news that evening that the folks out at these facilities where these kids are being held couldn't be comforted by the staff, that they had a policy on site that if the kids were crying, no one was allowed to touch them or comfort them. And the head of the American Pediatric Association had said that kind of trauma can cause permanent toxic damage to those kids. And that really kind of crystallized for us, and at least for myself and my wife, why we wanted to be there, at least have me represent our family there when we were challenging this policy out in Tornillo. When we got there kind of early, and we started getting ourselves oriented to what was going to happen. Just to set the stage for you, you're outside of town a little bit. Yeah, you drive up, and there are essentially toll gates for people that are going to go through and cross the border crossing. It's a historic bridge named for a decorated, undocumented person who came to the United States and fought in World War II and came back highly decorated. And you can go through these toll gates, and you kind of go around a curve, and that's where you cross the bridge. We got there were dozens of people there. I was expecting, and I think maybe the organizers were expecting, a few hundred people. But very quickly it became apparent that something special was going on. And by the time the crowd got there and fully, kind of manned the site, there were about 2,000 people there. And that, on a 2-day notice, blew my mind. That showed a level of local support for the protest, of statewide and national support for the protest, that was above my expectations, and it was a great surprise. And the feeling of positivity and solidarity and simmering anger was there among everyone. I was very thrilled to see candidates like Gina Ortiz-Jones running in Will Hurd's current district, Julie Oliver, who's going to run against Roger Williams, there, even though they weren't elected officials and didn't have an official role in the protest. They showed up. Beto O'Rourke, of course, showed up. He brought Joe Kennedy in from Massachusetts, and there were a number of nonprofits there as well who do work with migrants. And it was a fantastic event. And I felt kind of bad for the folks in the back, because it was clear that the crowd was even larger than the organizers had anticipated. And our poor piddling PA system that the organizers brought and their bullhorn just wasn't really sufficient. But we were lucky to be close up to the front because we got there kind of early. But there was a march, and then, you know, a rally sort of set up where Beto gave a great talk. At one point, I felt like he almost lost the crowd because he made what I think was an accurate statement. He said, you know, we say this isn't who we are now, but this is America right now. This is the situation in our country. And the crowd got really angry about that. And I think what he was kind of trying to get at was, you know, we say that this is not who we are, but so far 2,000 kids at least have been separated from their family. So 2,000 times our country has said this is who we are. And the only counter to that, the only thing that will make that not true, is if we respond to those 2,000 statements that this is who we are with millions of votes saying that it's not who we are, and with direct action targeted at, you know, elected officials and power holders and companies that are trying to profiteer off of this situation with these migrant kids. That's how we say this isn't who we are. It's not enough just to say it with words, because our actions right now at the border are speaking louder than words. And if you want to see a great example of the kind of message that we're sending at the border, look no further than the people who are showing up, presenting themselves lawfully, having broken no law and committed no crime, saying that they're here to seek asylum, and having their kids taken away from them because our Department of Homeland Security and our Customs and Border Protection and our ICE folks are saying that we can't afford to assume that this is a real family unit, and they're treating everyone as if they are child smugglers. That's disgusting. That's disgusting. And it certainly violates the values that we say we support internationally, to the point that the United Nations this weekend has come out to say that the U.S. is committing human rights violations by separating these families this way. Now, I want to humanize this a little bit, because ProPublica has obtained audio of the kids inside those facilities. And at one point, some of the audio that they've obtained captures a Customs and Border Patrol agent saying of the kids crying, yeah, we got a little orchestra in here. All that's missing is the conductor. Like it's a joke. Like it's funny that these kids are crying. It's not funny. It's disgusting that someone's going to sit there and watch these kids suffer that way. Jeff Merkley and other folks and reporters who have been into those facilities describe cages with kids in them like kennels. The kids sleeping on a little thin cot under a space blanket that's basically like foil. They don't have any privacy, where they are shuffled into a common area so they can use the porta potties or whatever it is they're using. Out in Tornillo, they're going to use tents in triple-digit heat. It's disgusting. But I want to play for you some of this audio so that you can hear what we're hearing or what people are hearing when they get into those facilities. So hang tight for just one moment, and I'm going to let you hear what people are hearing when they go to these facilities. This is audio obtained by ProPublica that allows you to kind of see the things that are going. Now, if just fair warning, this is really disturbing and it will hit you right in the heart. And I apologize, but we need to make sure that people understand what we're talking about when we're separating these kids from their families. So here we go. I'm going to activate the audio.
Quiero que me paren a mi papá, no quiero que lo deporten. Ay, papi.
aquí tenemos una orquesta. Faltaba el maestro, a ver.
Yo no me quiero parar de mi padre.
Primo, ven para acá. Vas a llegar con... Mira, ella te va a explicar y te va a ayudar. ¿Cierto, Consuelo?
Te va a pasar con su consulado hoy.
Papá. Papá. Ay, con mi tía por lo menos para que después llegue mi mami.
¿Me puedes abrir alguien me cerró la puerta esa?
Que me venga a traer mi tía para llevarme
Ella llama a tu tía si tú tienes número y habla con tu tía.
Tengo el número de
Ah, pues ahorita ella te ayuda para que hable. Cálmate nada más.
No, papá.
Voy por aquí, niña.
Papá.
Cuando saquen la comida, ¿verdad?
Ay, no, papá. Para que me venga.
Ya voy a llegar yo cuando esté allá.
Ya le voy a meter a comer.
Si tiene una celda, me la da, por favor.
Voy a tener.
Ay, no,
Porque van a
papá.
hacer, si te quieres juntar con ella, se junta aquí porque voy a tener
Ay,
chile.
no, papá.
O me la pone allá mejor. Allá en la orillita.
No, papá.
No, voy a tener que ser aquí porque voy a meter Jilly y se vaya a
No, papá.
Aquí se puede traer la silla y ella tiene
No, papá.
Y atrás no puede. Porque aquí, porque está pasando y
Ay,
pasando.
no, papá.
Porque todas las enfermedades, aquí
Ay,
tengo
no,
dos
papá.
ahí en la hilera. Tengo dos enfermedades y allá.
No, papá.
Me dijeron que lo
Ay,
van a
no,
sacar al
papá.
al patio.
El otro
Ay,
grupo de mujeres que
papá, no.
No, es para... No
Ay,
se
papá.
por eso no puedo tener a nadie.
Vale.
Porque luego viene Ice y Ice agarra pared.
Ay, no, papá. Voy a llamar a mi tía para que después de comer me venga a recoger.
Cuando agarren la comida, yo voy a venir para que le...
Ay, no, papá. Tengo el número yo de memoria, 34, 34. Ay, no, papá. Ay, no, papá.
Look, I'm going to pause that because you can get the idea. The fact that we are going to put thousands of kids through that is inhuman. It's evil. And the thought of my son standing there saying, "Daddy, Daddy," looking for me, knowing that he can't get to me, knowing that in some cases we may never see each other again, is horrifying, and it breaks my heart. And any feeling human being with a soul that's intact has to call this policy evil and stand up to the people that are implementing it. These people aren't being professional when they put these kids through this. They are participating in an evil act perpetrated at the top by Donald Trump and his thug Nazi Stephen Miller, inspired by people like Steve Bannon, backed by people like John Kelly and his Department of Homeland Security head, and all of the people from the top on down to the people standing in front of those kids and saying, "Oh, look, we have a little orchestra." Every single person involved in that is involved in an act of corporate evil that is making corporations money, by the way. There are military contractors making money hand over fist right now, trying to provide services, tripping over each other to try to get to the contracts that will be provided by this stuff. We are involved as a nation right now, under this president, in human rights violations and essentially torture of these kids, because the pain that these kids, that crying, is supposed to serve as a deterrent to people fleeing violence. We're saying, don't come here. I was at a rally a couple of days ago organized by Our Revolution, the local indivisible groups, and a number of other local activist groups. And one of these InfoWars nerds showed up with a camera and was asking people questions, trying to instigate confrontations at the site and everything. And one of the things he said was, don't you think that that this is the risk they took when they, tried to cross the border? And yeah, it was Owen, that guy that's like the discounts, Ryan Reynolds. Owen, it is a risk. And the risk that they're taking when they leave a country like Honduras that has had a coup that was supported by the United States, or when they leave a place like El Salvador, or they leave a place like Guatemala, or even Mexico, or places where, people are fleeing from these gang members or any of the other violence and political instability that we've either instigated or turned a blind eye to, or, have sat here and called people trying to cross this border, thugs and rapists and things like that. The risk they took is that when they brought their kids out of a dangerous situation, they were gambling that on our side of the border, we would act like human beings when those kids crossed the line with them, and that we would treat them with respect and dignity and not treat them like animals and separate them and put the kids in essentially kennels. That's the risk they took. And if they were wrong, we got real problems in this country. We have lost our soul if they were wrong. And it turns out right now with Donald Trump in the White House, they were wrong. They weren't wrong to make the gamble if we stood for what we say we stand for in this country, which should be the protection and the advancement of human rights and human dignity. And at the very least, we ought to stand on the words that are inscribed on the Statue of Liberty. Send us your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. It's on our damn advertising, for Christ's sake. We have an obligation as people in this country to stop this. And we can't wait until a midterm. We need our members of Congress fighting like hell right now in hearings, trying to push these people to make sure that there's even a process for putting the families back together. That's one of the things that's come out over this news cycle, is we're not even sure if we can put the families back together if we're properly tracking where the parents are versus where the kids are, so we can reunite them after whatever hearing they're going to get. We heard actually over the weekend of a 52-week-old kid, being presented for their hearing without an adult accompanying them from their family, as if that's going to provide some kind of immigration justice for them. That's a farce. And what's happening at the border now is disgusting. It's the worst instincts of the worst kinds of folks being given real power, and we have to stand up for it, or stand up against it, excuse me. Now, I just want to share something with you to really paint the severity of the situation we have in this country right now. On our way back, after having a really inspiring moment with all of these thousands of people, we get to Fort Stockton to stop for some food. And there is a great Mexican diner called Angie's. We stop there. The four of us that were traveling together sit down in a booth. And in walks this, baby boomer, maybe a little bit older guy in suspenders and a Make America Great Again hat. And I apologize for the background noise. There's some weather here. He sits down very politely, and we think, okay, there's not going to be anything to worry about here. About 8 other people eventually join him of roughly the same age, older folks. And they start talking about what they've been up to. And one woman is just in passing coming in to say hi, and they ask her where she's been. And she says she's been out at Tornillo at the protests. And somebody pipes up and says something like, well, they shouldn't be here, meaning those people shouldn't cross the border. And she says very politely, well, I disagree. I support those kids. And she, moves on. And after she leaves, this group of, really nice looking older folks who wouldn't surprise you to show up at a church, supper, sit around over Mexican food being served by a person of color, eating their chips and salsa and eating their enchiladas, and say things like, you ought to stay in your own country and change it. Those people shouldn't come here. That's the risk they took when they came this way. If they didn't want their kids to be separated from them, don't come here. Those folks are how Hitler rises. That's how you get authoritarian, bigoted Nazi people in power. You get a bunch of white folks treating the spaces even provided by them by people of color as their own, and they say very matter-of-factly that it's fine for them if their government puts brown people in cages because they shouldn't have come here seeking a better life or even seeking temporary safety from a dangerous situation. Now, those folks are not going to change their minds. If you're an older person who is wearing a Make America Great Again hat and you got suspenders on and you're willing to sit there not 40 miles from where kids are being held in tents or in cages and say that that's perfectly all right with you and those kids basically had it coming, we're not going to reach them until we beat them. We're going to have to beat them at the polls. We're going to have to beat them in the streets figuratively by shutting this stuff down with direct action nonviolence, and we're going to have to run the representatives out of Congress who are backing Trump up on this. And only at that point, after they realize that their ugliness and their bigotry is going to be thrown on the trash heap of history, will they suddenly realize that they never had those opinions in the first place. But what that's going to take for us to get them there is to beat the living crap out of them at the polls this time. You have got to get out to vote. You don't have a choice. It is happening here. The question of how it happens here is being answered before your eyes. It is happening. This child separation policy is an atrocity. It is a human rights violation perpetrated by this government. And if we don't stand up to it and say no to it in unequivocal terms, the next violation will be much worse. So you've got some homework tonight. You got to call your representative. You've got to tell them you don't support it, and you expect them to stand up to Trump on this. And you've got to find the folks like Raices and the other folks that are working on behalf of immigrants, folks like United We Dream, other folks that are working with folks who are migrants and communities of color, and you've got to back them up, because this is the tip of the spear when it comes to real human rights violations of the people crossing this border and trying to get to our country, and we have to stop it. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being interested in this topic, and thanks for hanging in there. Please become a subscriber. Hit the subscribe button on this video, and please become a patron on Patreon. The link is in the description so we can keep making these kinds of videos. But I appreciate you tuning in today. Don't take this lying down. We can't afford it. It's here. The proto-Nazis will be real Nazis if they win an election in 2018. We have to stop them. Thanks for tuning in.